The stranger in black leather. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the California sky in gold and rose, while the hum of engines echoed down Highway 74. A group of loud bikers pulled up to a remote roadside diner that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. The place, nestled between pine trees and dry grass, was a hidden gem for locals but rarely visited by outsiders. The bikers, 6 of them, wore matching leather jackets with skulls and chains stitched across the back. They were loud, brash, and eager to dominate whatever space they entered. Inside the diner was quiet. A few truckers sat at booths sipping black coffee. The waitress, Sandy, wiped the counter with a tired but patient smile. She had seen men like them before. Men who barked louder than they bit. But tonight would be different. Tonight, someone else was watching from the corner booth. A man alone, dressed in plain black with long hair tucked behind his ears and a peaceful stillness about him. Nobody had really noticed him until the door swung open and the bikers took the room by storm. They laughed, shouted, and swaggered to the bar stools, making sure everyone heard their boots on the floor. One of them, a broad man with a handlebar mustache, tossed a coin at Sandy and said, "How about you bring us something strong enough to knock out the week?" His friends roared in laughter. Sandy offered a tight smile and turned to prepare their order, but one of the bikers noticed the man sitting in the corner. He squinted. Something about the guy rubbed him wrong. Maybe it was the way he just sat there, calm and composed, like he wasn't afraid of them. He nudged his friend and said, "Check this guy out, thinks he's John Wick or something." Another biker turned, followed the stare, then chuckled. "Hey man," he shouted across the room, "you lose your bike? Or did your mommy drop you off?" The others laughed again and their voices filled the small diner. The man didn't respond. He kept sipping his tea and gazing out the window as if none of it mattered, but his stillness only irritated them more. The leader of the group, Vince, stood up and walked over to the stranger. "Hey, I'm talking to you. You deaf or just stupid?" Keanu Reeves looked up slowly. His eyes were calm but sharp, like the ocean before a storm. He set his cup down and said quietly, "I heard you." Vince smirked. "Oh, good. Then maybe you can explain why you're dressed like a funeral and acting like you own the place." Keanu didn't flinch. "I don't own anything here," he said simply. "Just came for some tea." The rest of the group was watching closely now, sensing tension and loving every second of it. Vince leaned in closer, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "You got guts, old man. Or maybe you just don't know how this works. People like you don't ignore people like me." Keanu studied him for a moment, then said, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to rest. Maybe you should do the same." For a few seconds, nobody moved. The air turned heavy. The silence was more piercing than the bikers yelling. Then, without warning, Vince grabbed Keanu's tea and tossed it across the floor. "Oops," he sneered. "Guess your rest is over?" Sandy gasped, stepping out from behind the counter. "That's enough, Vince. Leave him alone." Vince ignored her. "What are you going to do, huh? You want to step in for your boyfriend here?" Keanu sighed and stood up slowly. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself like someone who had seen too much of the world to be afraid of small men with big egos. His voice stayed soft, but there was weight behind every word. "I'm asking you," he said. "Please sit down. Before this turns into something none of us will forget." Vince laughed in his face. "Are you threatening me?" Keanu shook his head. "I'm warning you." Another biker stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Man, who does this guy think he is?" Then something strange happened. One of the truckers near the window suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide. He leaned over to his buddy and whispered, something that changed the man's expression instantly. Their faces turned pale. The whisper traveled fast across the room. Eyes began darting toward the man in black. Murmurs replaced laughter. Even Sandy paused, her breath caught in her throat. Vince noticed it too. What are y'all whispering about?" One of the truckers stood up slowly, carefully. "You might want to back off, man," he said. "That ain't just some guy, that's Keanu Reeves." Vince frowned. "What?" "Yeah," another trucker added. "He's the real deal. Movies, sure. But he's also the guy who pulled 2 passengers out of a burning plane. The guy who paid an entire crew's salary when the studio cut their bonuses. He's the kind of man you don't humiliate in public because he never brags. But when he moves, things change. Suddenly, the energy shifted. The bikers looked unsure. A few stepped back. Even Vince, for a split second, hesitated. Keanu stood still, not needing to prove anything, but Vince wasn't ready to lose face. Pride was louder than wisdom. "So what?" he growled. "I don't care if he's a movie star. He's still just a man." Keanu's phone buzzed. He reached into his jacket, pulled it out, and made a single call. He turned his back to Vince, not in disrespect, but because he no longer saw a threat. He spoke just a few words. "Yes, it's me, I'm fine, but you might want to check the footage from this diner. Things are getting a little loud." He hung up without saying goodbye. Vince blinked. What was that about? Keanu didn't answer. He simply sat back down. Less than a minute later, Sandy's eyes widened as a small screen near the cash register lit up with an alert. She stepped forward, looked at the screen, then looked at Keanu in disbelief. "Sir," she whispered, "that call, it went through our surveillance system. It's directly connected to the studio's private security line." "Did you really?" Keanu smiled. "They like to keep an eye on me, just in case." Vince tried to laugh it off, but his friends were no longer by his side. One by one, they backed toward the door. One of them even mouthed sorry to Sandy. Before slipping outside, Keanu stood again and looked Vince in the eye. "You still want to fight?" he asked gently. Vince opened his mouth, but no words came out. Keanu nodded slowly. "Good choice." The door to the diner swung open. A black SUV pulled up, silent and fast. A man in a sharp suit stepped out and walked in with calm authority. He looked around the room, scanned the mess, and then looked at Keanu. "Are you all right, sir?" Keanu nodded. "Just a little tea spill." The man smiled faintly and turned to Vince. "You'll be hearing from legal soon. We've already retrieved the security footage," Vince stuttered. "Legal? For what?" "For harassment, for threatening a civilian, for damaging property, and possibly more. We'll be in touch." Vince turned ghost white. Keanu walked to the counter and quietly handed Sandy a $100 bill. "Sorry about the mess." Sandy blinked, tears forming in her eyes. Thank you. Thank you for not letting this get worse." Keanu smiled softly. Kindness always has more power than anger. As he walked out the door, the entire diner fell silent. No one spoke. The wind outside carried the scent of pine and diesel as the SUV drove away into the fading light, but that night no one forgot what they saw. And Vince? He had no idea the next morning would bring a visitor to his doorstep, someone with an offer that would change everything. Cliffhanger. Who was the visitor? What did Keanu set in motion with that quiet phone call? The answer would turn Vince's world upside down. The visit that shook the morning. The morning sun hadn't yet warmed the small town when Vince awoke to the sharp rumble of an unfamiliar engine outside his modest garage. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy from a night of restless sleep. Something about the previous evening kept playing in his mind. Those eyes, that calm voice, the way the others had slowly slipped away from his side like leaves on a windless day. And then there was the call. The call Keanu Reeves made. Not loud, not threatening. Just final. Vince sat up in bed, shirtless, his boots still by the door, his leather jacket draped over a chair. The scent of oil and stale beer hung in the room. He lived above the motorcycle repair shop he owned, a one-man operation that barely kept him afloat. Despite all the bluster, Vince had seen better days. The loud persona, the tough guy attitude, it was all armor. Armor built from years of loss, anger, and loneliness. As he staggered toward the window, wiping sleep from his eyes, he saw it. A sleek black car parked directly in front of the shop. Not a police cruiser, not some repo truck. This was different. The kind of car that purred instead of roared. Tinted windows, polished metal, subtle power, and standing next to it was a man in a crisp gray suit. holding a folder in one hand and a briefcase in the other. Vince's gut twisted. He threw on a shirt, stomped down the stairs, and yanked open the door. The suited man looked up and smiled politely. "Mr. Vincent Donnelly?" Vince crossed his arms. "Who's asking?" "My name is Evan Langston. I represent a private legal and philanthropic group based in Los Angeles. May I come in?" Vince hesitated. "This about last night?" "Yes," Evan said, "but probably not the way you think." Vince stepped aside, still wary. Evan walked into the dusty shop with a calm grace, glancing around at the tools, the torn posters, the cracked tile floor. "You run this place on your own?" Evan asked. "What's it to you?" Vince said sharply. "Just gathering context," Evan replied with a faint smile. "Mr. Reeves asked us to do a full background check before deciding how to proceed. He doesn't like to waste time punishing people when there's something deeper going on." Vince frowned. "Wait, what? You're saying he's not suing me?" Evan nodded. "That's correct. Instead, he wants to offer you something. But first he asked that I tell you a story. His story." Vince grunted. "His story? What's that supposed to do?" "Perhaps nothing," Evan replied. "Or perhaps it'll do exactly what he hopes." Evan set down the briefcase, opened the folder, and began to speak, not like a lawyer but like a narrator revealing something raw and real. He spoke about a boy who lost his best friend in a car crash when he was barely out of high school, about a young man who, despite fame and fortune, lived alone in a small apartment while driving a used motorcycle, about a star who didn't believe in the spotlight but used it to lift others from the shadows, about Keanu Reeves. He's helped children's hospitals without letting anyone know. He's donated millions under fake names. He's the kind of man who listens to janitors and brings food to grips working overtime on film sets. You mocked him last night, but he didn't call security to destroy you. He called to protect everyone from what could have been. He's seen too much real violence to let fake tough guys get under his skin." Vince felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected this. He had expected consequences, lawsuits, shame. Instead, he got a biography and a lawyer with kind eyes. "So what does he want from me?" Vince muttered. "Nothing," Evan said. "But he's offering something, an invitation." "To what?" Evan opened the briefcase and handed Vince a sleek black envelope. Inside was a card with a name and a date. Below that, a handwritten note. "Sometimes people need to fall before they realize what they're climbing. If you're willing to climb again, meet me in 3 days." Keanu stared at it for a long time. The words didn't sting. They didn't burn. They healed, slowly, like light creeping through closed blinds. "What's this meeting for?" Vince finally asked. Evan smiled. "Keanu owns a private motorcycle design studio. He's looking to mentor a few select people. Not just for business, but for life. You've got a background in engineering. You've built custom bikes. You've also burned a few bridges, but he thinks you're worth one more." Vince's knees felt weak. He gripped the side of the table. "He's offering me a job?" "No," Evan said gently. "He's offering you a chance." Silence fell over the room like a soft blanket. Outside, birds began to chirp. Morning was finally settling in. Vince didn't know what to say. All his life he'd fought for respect, barked for attention, fought shadows instead of facing the mirror. And now the one man he tried to humiliate was reaching a hand down, not to crush him, but to lift him up. "Tell him," Vince started, his voice cracking. "Tell him I don't deserve this." Evan packed the folder and smiled. "Then come and prove him wrong." For the next 3 days, Vince was a different man. He cleaned the garage like it was sacred ground. He found his old sketches, buried under piles of receipts and empty cans. He pulled out the half-built bike he had abandoned 2 years ago, the one he said he'd finish when things got better. Now, that bike had a new reason to exist. On the 3rd day, he rode into the city on a dusty chopper, the card in his jacket pocket, his pride left behind in the oil-stained floor of his shop. Keanu's studio was hidden behind a tall gate in an industrial part of town. Quiet, clean, humble, yet secure. No big logos, No paparazzi. Just steel, glass, and purpose. When Vince walked through the front door, he saw something he didn't expect. Dozens of people working together. Welders, designers, former gang members now creating art on wheels. A young woman with burn scars teaching others how to paint custom tanks. An old Marine in a wheelchair leading the workshop. And at the center of it all was Keanu, laughing gently with a group of teens who clearly adored him. He was wearing a black hoodie and gloves. He didn't look like a star. He looked like someone who belonged. When he saw Vince, he walked over without hesitation. "Glad you came," he said softly. Vince's eyes burned. "Why me? After all that?" Keanu shrugged. "Because people who fall hardest often rise strongest, and you looked like a man who just needed someone to believe in him again." Vince looked down. "I'm sorry for what I said, for what I did." Keanu smiled. "I already forgave you. Now let's see what you can build." And with that, the studio doors opened wider. But while the healing had begun, something unexpected was waiting on the horizon. An event that would test Vince's resolve and reveal a hidden truth about his past. Something even Keanu didn't see coming. Cliffhanger. A mysterious letter arrives at the studio with Vince's name on it, containing a warning that could destroy everything he's just begun to rebuild. The letter that reopened the wound. Sound of welding torches buzzed in the background as Vince tightened the final bolt on the newly assembled front fork. Sweat dripped from his brow, not from heat, but from focus. For the first time in years, his hands didn't shake. They weren't guided by anger or adrenaline, but by intent, steady, thoughtful motion. Around him, the workshop hummed with quiet determination. No yelling, no barking, just people rebuilding more than machines. They were rebuilding themselves. Keanu Reeves watched silently from the corner, leaning against a rusted support beam, with a mug of herbal tea in his hands. He had an unusual way of managing the space. He didn't give orders. He asked questions. He didn't criticize. He offered alternatives. And he listened. To everyone. Especially those others ignored. When the lunch bell rang, a group of apprentices set down their tools and headed for the long communal table. Vince was about to follow when something odd happened. One of the interns, a young man named Julio, walked over carrying a small envelope. His hands were trembling slightly. Vince? Someone left this at the gate. No name, no return address. Vince wiped his hands on a towel and took the envelope, frowning. The paper was thick, smooth, not from any local print shop. It was sealed in wax, the kind you only saw in movies or old novels. Something about it instantly unsettled him. He stepped outside for air and cracked the seal. Inside was a single folded page, written in slanted, deliberate handwriting. You may think redemption is earned by building bikes, but some of us remember the road you burned to get here. One mistake can be forgiven. The trail of mistakes you left behind, that's another story. Be careful who you let believe in you. They don't know what you did. No signature, no clue. Just venom. Vince read the letter again, slower this time, trying to steady the shaking that had returned to his fingers. The words weren't vague. They were personal. Someone knew him. Someone knew the man he used to be. Not the loud-mouthed biker who barked in diners, but the one from years ago. The one who made real mistakes. The one who hurt people not just with fists or words, but with silence, betrayal, and choices he never faced up to. He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't eat lunch that day. Instead, he went to the far end of the garage where a rusting Harley frame had been sitting untouched since the day he arrived. It belonged to no one. A project left unfinished. Keanu had told him, "You'll know when to work on that one. It doesn't need speed. It needs honesty." And now, it felt like the frame was staring him down. That evening, when the others had gone home, Vince stayed behind. The shadows stretched long across the concrete, and the buzz of city traffic faded into a distant murmur. Under a single hanging light, he pulled out the letter again and read it a third time. His mind wandered back to a memory he had buried deep. It was years ago, before the leather jackets and the biker bravado, before the fists and noise. He had been part of a crew that raced illegally through the desert. The money was fast, the crowd was wild, and the danger was real. One night, Vince had made a reckless bet against a man named Leo Ramos. Leo was a father of two, an ex-mechanic trying to make a comeback. He wasn't the fastest, but he was desperate to win that night. Vince had rigged the course. He never meant for anyone to get hurt. He thought the sabotage would just delay Leo. But the bike flipped and Leo didn't walk again after that. Vince never faced him, never visited the hospital. He left the scene and never looked back. Until now. He stared at the letter like it was a mirror. A brutal, honest mirror. The next morning, Keanu found him asleep in the garage, slumped over the unfinished Harley frame. He didn't say anything, just poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Vince. "Couldn't sleep?" Keanu asked gently. Vince looked tired, more tired than he had been in years. "Someone sent me a letter," he said. "They know what I did. Something from my past. Something I never made right." Keanu didn't flinch. "You want to talk about it?" Vince shook his head. "No, I want to fix it." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then do it." "What if I'm too late?" Keanu set down his cup and said, "Redemption isn't about being on time. It's about showing up when it matters." Vince took a long breath. "I hurt someone years ago, a racer, Leo Ramos. I never said sorry, never helped. I left him in a wheelchair because of my own pride." Keanu sat beside him, hands folded. "What would you say to him if he were here?" Vince looked away. "That I was a coward, that I chose silence because it was easier than shame, and that I've never stopped carrying what I did." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then find him, say it to him, and don't expect forgiveness. Just give the truth." With nothing more than that, Vince stood, wiped his hands, and left the garage. For the next few days he searched. He called old contacts, dug through local hospital records. He finally found Leo in a modest rehab center 2 towns over. He hadn't raced in years. He coached now, young kids who had dreams he once held. When Vince arrived at the center, his legs felt like lead. The front desk lady asked who he was there to see. He said Leo Ramos and gave his real name. As he waited, his fingers tapped nervously on the chair's armrest. The door creaked open, after what felt like forever, and there he was, Leo, older, thinner, in a motorized chair. But his eyes were just as sharp. They locked eyes. Vince stood up slowly. "Leo," he said quietly. "It's me, Vince Donnelly." Leo didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared. "I know you probably hate me," Vince continued. "I deserve it. I just came to say something I should have said a long time ago. I ruined your life because I was selfish, because I was scared. I can't fix what I did, but I won't hide anymore." The silence was crushing. Leo finally spoke. His voice was calm but laced with pain. "Why now?" Vince swallowed. "Because someone believed in me, and I realized I didn't deserve that belief unless I faced everything I tried to bury." Leo looked at him for a long moment. Then, to Vince's shock, Leo nodded once. "I won't forgive you. Not today, maybe not ever, but I respect that you came. Most wouldn't." Vince bowed his head. "That's enough, thank you." He turned to leave, but Leo said one more thing. "Vince, you still ride?" "Yeah," Vince replied. "Not to win. Not anymore." "Then ride for something else," Leo said. "Ride for change." When Vince returned to the studio, Keanu was waiting with 2 helmets. "We're building a new prototype," he said. "Want to take it for a ride?" Vince smiled for the first time in days. "Yeah, let's ride." But as the engines roared to life and the 2 men rode off into the winding hills, none of them knew what was waiting at the next turn. A figure from Vince's past, who wasn't looking for peace, but revenge. Cliffhanger. Someone is watching. Vince from the shadows, following his every move. And this time, they don't want words. They want payback. the one who never let go the morning after the ride. Vince returned to the studio with dirt on his boots and a strange calm in his chest. It had been years since he'd felt wind on his face without anger in his gut. Riding alongside Keanu wasn't like the wild races from his past. It wasn't about speed or proving something. It was about movement. Forward, not backward. The road didn't roar anymore. It whispered. But peace, as always, didn't last long in Vince's life. It began with a noise he almost ignored. It came late, just after midnight, when the last of the tools had been put away and the studio lights dimmed. Vince was locking up when he heard something outside. Too faint for a car, too steady for an animal. A soft rustle, a metallic click. Then silence. He stepped into the dark alley behind the studio, flashlight in hand, heart starting to race. Nothing moved at first. Just shadows stretching across brick and steel. But then he saw it. A single photograph tacked to the back wall. He stepped closer. It was old. Printed from a cheap camera. But unmistakable. It showed Vince at a racetrack years ago, shirtless, grinning, holding a wad of cash. Beside him, beaten and bloody, lay a man being pulled away on a stretcher. Vince's hands trembled. Beneath the photo, scrawled in red marker, were the words, "You think this ends with an apology?" His mind swirled. Who? Who had this? Who would go this far? He yanked the photo from the wall and searched the alley, but whoever left it was gone. The next day, Vince said nothing. Not to Keanu, not to Julio, not to anyone. He threw himself into work, trying to outpace the panic. But by sunset, a second message arrived, this time in his locker. A copy of the police report from Leo's crash. The parts Vince thought no one would ever see. The ones that proved the sabotage. A single sticky note on top read, "I was there too, and I never forgot." Keanu noticed something was wrong. "You're quieter," he said during lunch. Vince looked up, distracted. "Just tired." "No," Keanu replied. "It's more than that. You're looking over your shoulder like the past is chasing you." Vince hesitated, then nodded. "It is." He showed Keanu the photo and the note. Keanu studied them carefully. He didn't ask questions, didn't accuse. Instead, he leaned back, thoughtful. "There's someone who thinks they know your whole story," he said. "Someone who hasn't healed. They want to ruin me," Vince muttered. "And maybe they should." "Or maybe," Keanu said gently, "they just want you to see the pain they carried." Vince looked away. "I already said sorry to Leo." "This isn't Leo," Keanu said quietly. "This is someone else." The next few days were filled with tension. Vince kept working, but every time he reached for a wrench or picked up a paintbrush, he felt eyes on him. He began noticing things, footsteps that didn't belong, items on his desk moved slightly, tires slashed in the parking lot. And then came the message that changed everything. It arrived on paper, but it wasn't written. It was drawn a sketch of fire, of two bikes, one intact, the other engulfed in flames. At the bottom was a date. Friday. Friday, Vince remembered. Years ago, after Leo's crash, there had been another racer. A kid named Ricky Salas, barely 20, full of fire and speed. He had idolized Vince back then, followed him everywhere, begged him to teach him, but Vince had laughed him off. "You're not built for this, kid," he'd said once. "Go back to mopeds." Ricky tried to prove him wrong. He entered an illegal race on the same cursed desert course where Leo had fallen. He wasn't ready. The bike wasn't tuned. And when the storm rolled in halfway through, he lost control and crashed into a ravine. Ricky didn't die, but his spine snapped. Just like Leo, he never walked again. Only difference. Ricky had no one. No family. No lawyers. No reporters. Just a hospital bed and a quiet room. Vince had never visited. But now it made sense. Ricky was still watching, still hurting, and he was coming. That Friday, the studio closed early. Keanu had gone to a charity event across town. Most of the crew left before dark. Vince stayed behind. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He sat in the middle of the garage, a single lamp above his head, the photo and sketch in his hand. And then, just after midnight, the doors creaked open. A man stepped in. Tall, lean, scarred. His face was older now, thinner, but his eyes were unmistakable. "Ricky," Vince said quietly. Ricky nodded, stepping fully into the light. He walked with a limp, a deep one. His left leg dragged, slightly. Metal braces ran from his knees to his boots, but he walked. Somehow Vince stood. "You've been following me." "Just watching," Ricky said. "I wanted to see if you'd change or just hide again." Vince didn't defend himself. "I deserve your anger." Ricky walked in slow circles around him, never blinking. "Leo forgave you." "No," Vince said. "Leo tolerated me. There's a difference." Ricky stopped. "You left us both. Him in a chair, me in a hole. And now what? You build bikes with movie stars and think it all goes away?" Vince's voice cracked. "No, it doesn't. I wake up every day with it in my chest." Ricky's fists clenched. "I used to dream about burning your shop down, watching you scream. But now I see that wouldn't change anything. You're already burning. I just came to say that I see it." Vince swallowed. "So what now?" Ricky stared at him long and hard, then reached into his coat. Vince tensed, but Ricky didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a key. "This opens the shop where I live. There's an engine on my bench. I've been trying to finish it for 10 years, can't do it alone. If you really mean what you say, if you really changed, then come help me finish it." Vince froze. "You sure?" he whispered. Ricky nodded once. "No, but I'm willing to find out." That weekend, Vince drove out of town to Ricky's place. It was a rundown shed with one working light and a bench covered in dust. But the engine was beautiful. Raw metal, potential waiting to be shaped. They worked in silence at first, then in words, then in laughter. Slow, cautious, but real. And when the engine finally purred to life under their hands, something deeper ignited, something that felt like forgiveness, even if the word was never spoken. When Vince returned to Keanu's studio, he looked different, not lighter, not heavier, just whole. But as the gates closed behind him that night, Keanu approached quietly with his phone in hand. "Vince," he said softly, "you need to see this." He turned the screen around. On it was a news alert. Unknown arsonist targets former illegal racing strip. Fire suspected to be intentional. One man in custody claims he was working for someone else. Vince's blood ran cold. The past wasn't finished yet. Cliffhanger. Someone else had been pulling the strings. Someone darker, hidden in the shadows of the wreckage Vince left behind. And they were far from done. The shadow behind the fire. The screen's glow faded as Vince stared at the news alert. The words blurred in his vision, but the meaning stayed sharp, like glass under skin. Arson. Someone had torched the desert track where Leo crashed and Ricky nearly died, the same place Vince once ruled with reckless pride. Someone had burned the past, not to erase it, but to send a message. Keanu watched him carefully. "This wasn't Ricky," he said, voice low and certain. Vince nodded. "No. Ricky wanted truth, not fire." Keanu handed him the phone. "The man they arrested said he was paid. Cash. He doesn't know who gave it, but he remembers the instructions." Vince raised an eyebrow. "What kind of instructions?" "He was told to light the fire on the anniversary of Leo's crash. He was told it would bring the devil to his knees." Vince's hands went cold. "Someone's been watching everything," he murmured. "Not just me. Not just the track. Everything." Keanu said nothing. He didn't need to. The air between them was thick with realization. Someone out there wasn't after redemption or justice. They wanted destruction. They wanted Vince broken. Not just for the past, but for daring to change. Over the next few days, things began to unravel. A fire inspector arrived at the studio asking questions. Keanu handled it with grace, but Vince could feel the eyes on him. Whispers returned. Glances lingered longer than they should. The piece he had built, shaky as it was, began to crack. Julio found another note. This time, left on his own locker. It said, "Ask your boss about Morgan." Vince went pale when he read the name. Morgan. It was a name he hadn't spoken in over a decade. He left the studio without saying a word. Keanu didn't stop him. He knew some battles had to be fought alone. Morgan was once Vince's closest friend. They had built bikes together when they were still teenagers, two kids with calloused hands and oil-stained dreams. But they'd parted ways the day Vince chose. The money and speed of the underground circuit over the patient craft of real design. Morgan had begged him to stay clean. Begged him not to join the crew that led to Leo's crash. Vince walked away anyway. And Morgan? He vanished from the racing scene shortly after. Rumors said he moved up north, started his own shop. Others whispered, darker things, about a betrayal that cut so deep Morgan never recovered. Now Vince understood. Morgan hadn't vanished. He had been waiting. Vince tracked him down through an old supplier. The address led him to a weathered warehouse on the edge of a pine forest tucked behind an old logging road. The sign above the door read, Ember Designs. Ironic given the fire. Vince knocked. No answer. He tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the shop was clean, organized, but cold. No photos, no music. Just tools on the wall, metal on the table, and silence thick as fog. Then from the back room a voice. I wondered how long it would take. Vince froze. Morgan. The man who stepped out looked older, harder, with silver streaks in his beard and a scar across his brow. But the eyes were the same. Sharp, wounded, unblinking. You burned down the track? Vince asked quietly. Morgan tilted his head. I lit nothing, but I set it in motion. Vince stepped forward. Why? Morgan chuckled darkly. You still think this is about one crash? Vince said nothing. Morgan pointed at a wall covered in sketches. Old race designs. Newspaper clippings. Photos of bikes and broken bodies. At the center, a picture of Vince and Morgan, young, proud, before it all fell apart. You left me, Vince, Morgan said. We were brothers. You chose fame. You chose cash. I warned you what that world would take. But you didn't care. And when the crash happened, you let them pin it on me. Vince's eyes widened. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Morgan interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. You ran, like always. And when the dust settled, I lost everything. Not just my shop, my name, my future. All because you didn't speak up. Vince stepped back. The weight of truth crashed over him like a wave. In the chaos of saving himself, he never looked behind. He never saw who got caught in the wreckage. I came to say sorry, Vince said. I don't want your sorry, Morgan spat. I want you to feel what it's like to have everything ripped away after you finally build it back up. Vince understood now. The letters, the threats, the fire. It was never about Ricky or Leo. It was about Morgan, the ghost of betrayal, wearing flesh. Then do it, Vince said. Take me down, expose me, destroy the studio, burn everything, but it won't bring you peace. Morgan narrowed his eyes. You think peace is the goal? He whispered. Then from behind the back wall came movement. Vince tensed. A door creaked open. Two men stepped out. Silent, expressionless. Vince recognized one of them from the news article. The arsonist. The one who said he was paid. Morgan looked at them and nodded. Escort him out, he said. Vince didn't fight. Not this time. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Keanu's studio. It was addressed to Keanu, not Vince. Inside was a single sentence. You built him up. Now watch what happens when he falls. Keanu set the letter down slowly. He walked into the main floor where Vince was working on a vintage engine. We have a problem, Keanu said gently. Vince didn't look up. I know. Keanu handed him the letter. Vince read it, then sat back against the bench. He's going to sabotage me, Vince said. Not with flames, with truth. Keanu looked him in the eye. Then we face it. Vince's jaw tightened. He's got documents, proof that I let him take the fall. He's going to go public. And when he does, Keanu said, we don't hide. We tell the story. The whole story. Vince nodded slowly, but inside a storm was brewing. Because Morgan wasn't just after public shame, he was after collapse, and he had one last move to play. A secret that even Vince didn't know. One that would shatter everything, cliffhanger. Morgan makes contact with a national news network and reveals he has video footage that could not only end Vince's future, but expose a scandal that ties Keanu Reeves himself to the dark world they all left behind. The confession that changed everything. The clouds over Los Angeles were unusually heavy that morning. The sun struggled to pierce the gray sky, casting the city in a dim, colorless light. At Keanu Reeves's private motorcycle studio, the mood was no different. Tension hung in the air like fog, thick, unspoken, inescapable. The news broke just before dawn. A major media outlet published a 30-minute expose headlined, "Dark Truth Behind Hollywood's Motorcycle Studio. Betrayal, Sabotage in a Buried Past." The broadcast began with slow, ominous music and panned over old footage of illegal street races, wreckage, and grainy photographs. It named names. It showed faces. And then it cut to the real blow, a shaky video from over 10 years ago. In it, a younger Vince could be seen arguing with Morgan in a crowded garage. Morgan shouted about sabotage, about doing the right thing. Vince, full of ego and rage, shouted back. And then, he turned, saw the camera, and snarled, "Let him take the fall." He knew what he was signing up for. The footage ended. Vince's voice, frozen in time, echoed across every screen in the country. People didn't care about the years between then and now. They didn't care about apologies or change. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended. Fingers pointed. And worst of all, they dragged Keanu into it. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he gave Vince a second chance. Is Keanu Reeves protecting criminals? Was the Hollywood hero funding a redemption scam? Has the nice guy image gone too far? Keanu sat in his office with his phone buzzing endlessly on the desk. Publicists begged him to release a statement. Lawyers urged him to cut ties with Vince. The studio's board, the silent investors who believed in the project's mission, wanted answers. And yet when Vince walked into the office, Keanu didn't look angry. He looked calm. "It's everywhere," Vince said, voice hoarse. "I ruined everything." Keanu leaned back, folding his hands. "You didn't ruin anything. Truth just caught up. Now you decide what happens next." Vince lowered his head. "You should cut me loose. Save yourself. I wouldn't blame you." Keanu stood slowly and walked over to the window. "You ever heard of the Japanese art called kintsugi?" he asked. Vince shook his head. "It's when you take a broken bowl and repair it with gold. Not to hide the cracks, but to show them. To make them part of the story. Because the break makes it more beautiful." Vince looked confused. "What are you saying?" Keanu turned to him. "Let's not hide the cracks." Vince stared at him. "You want to go public?" he whispered. "Not just public," Keanu said. "Truthful." That evening, with cameras rolling, Keanu and Vince sat side by side in a modest room. No glitz, no spotlight, just two men. And one story. Keanu began. He talked about second chances, about what it meant to believe in people, after the world stopped believing in them. About how everyone has a past, but not everyone has someone willing to walk with them through it. Then he handed the mic to Vince. Vince's hands trembled slightly as he held it. He didn't defend himself. He didn't blame anyone. He told the truth. He spoke about the fame, the pride, the illegal races, the fear that made him a coward, the betrayal of Morgan, the damage to Leo and Ricky, and most of all, the silence that hurt more than his actions. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the past bare and said, I want to be better, not for a second chance, but for the people I failed the first time. Millions watched, and for a long time no one said a word. Then came the flood. Some called him a fraud, others called him brave. But among the noise, something happened. Leo posted a comment under the video. It takes strength to crash, but more to stand up again. Ricky posted one too. He helped me finish the engine. I saw who he is now, I believe him. And the next day, something even more unexpected occurred. Morgan posted a letter of his own. I wanted revenge. I wanted him to feel what I felt. And I did everything to bring him down. But when I watched him speak, I saw the kid I once called my brother, the one before the fame, the one who built bikes with me in our backyard. This isn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it's something better. It's a start. The internet flipped. Now the story wasn't about sabotage, it was about something else. Healing. Weeks passed. The media storm faded. The studio survived. Not because it ignored the scandal, but because it faced it. Keanu expanded the program. Added more builders with troubled pasts, veterans, former convicts, foster youth. He turned the scandal into a mission. And Vince, he never stopped working. He didn't run anymore. He rebuilt, one bolt at a time. He and Morgan met again, not with anger, but with purpose. They started designing a new bike together, one named December. For what had burned and what rose after. And on the day it was unveiled, with cameras watching once again, Keanu stood beside them, smiling softly. It's not about being perfect, he said. It's about being real. And real people make mistakes. But real people also rise. The crowd applauded. Vince stepped forward, touching the bike's polished tank. It gleamed like gold across a crack. Just like him. Just like all of them. In a world where everyone tries to hide their damage, Vince showed what happens when you own it, rebuild from it, and use it to light the way forward. Not just for yourself, but for everyone watching from the shadows, waiting to believe again.